Her door closed with a click that briefly echoed in the hallway, and you could hear the creak of her bed frame when she lay down. Alex sat on the edge of the sofa and removed his boots, then lay back. Emily had set out 2 blankets, one for him to use as a pillow, and one which he spread out and pulled up to his chin. The wool was scratchy, but that wasn't what kept him awake. Instead, he turned his head toward the fireplace and watched the flames as the thoughts ran through his head. For a long while, of course, he thought only about the sensation of her lips on his. It hadn't been often in his life when he'd had the chance to kiss a woman so beautiful. Still, as much as he'd enjoyed it, he found his thoughts turning more to the struggle she was going through. Doesn't seem right that she's in this all alone, he thought. But then, what if she's not supposed to be? What if I'm the one who's supposed to get a sign? What if the storm was my sign, sending me back here? The wind and snow had been unlike anything he'd ever seen before, acting more like a living beast than a force of nature. As a doctor, he believed in science, but he'd also seen many things in the world that science wasn't able to account for. What if this wasn't about Frankie at all? What if Emily is the one I'm supposed to help? He thought about that for a long while there in the flickering light, and finally a small voice arose in the back of his mind. What if you're supposed to help each other? He turned on his side and looked out at the night sky. The moon was pouring its silvery light upon the earth now that the storm was over and the skies were clear. He guessed that he would have an easy ride home when the sun came up. In fact, he even had the wild suspicion that he could go saddle Charlie up right now and he'd be able to make it back to his place without too much trouble. I could go home, go back to my comfortable life, and forget all about tonight. Forget about Emily. Forget about Frankie. Forget the dinner. Forget our kiss. I tried to get her to have faith. She refused. I can put all of this behind me. Or I can try again, even if it doesn't change anything in the end. Maybe I'm the one being tested right now, not her. He stood and went to the window. The storm is over, and it will be a new day come the dawn. He felt for his pocket watch and opened it toward the fire so that he could see the time. It was 12:30 already. Time to get going, he thought. He quietly pulled his boots back on and went out to the hall. There was a lot to do, and not much time to do it. Christmas morning was a morning like any other. Emily rose with a lightening day, which in late December meant that she was getting more sleep than she had a few months ago. But it scarcely seemed to matter. She was always exhausted, and today especially. Her sleep had been fitful. Every few minutes, it seemed, she had woken to check on Frankie's temperature. If she hadn't slept well, the same couldn't be said about her son. He had barely made a peep in the night, and even now, as she slipped her hand onto his forehead, he only gently pursed his lips and continued sleeping. She let her hand rest there only a moment so as not to wake him. Feels entirely normal, she thought. Just like it did all night. Thank God for that, at least. She hadn't been sure about trusting the medical advice of such a baby-faced physician, but in the end the doctor had been right. The doctor, she remembered. The man who's sleeping on my sofa downstairs. Well, perhaps it wasn't a morning exactly like any other. She dressed quietly, pulled her hair back with a ribbon, and sat for a moment to examine herself in the mirror. Good Lord, I look a fright. She squinted at herself in the glass, but it did nothing to improve her vision or her reflection. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, and there was no way to fix that aside from getting more regular rest. And that's not going to happen anytime soon, she thought. Emily put on her slippers and checked Frankie one last time, making sure that he was covered, before she went out to the hall and headed downstairs. She stepped quietly, carefully, and avoided the creaky step, third from the top. Halfway down the stairs, she paused and listened closely. There was no noise from upstairs, no crying, no ruffling of covers, and also none from below. He's either asleep or gone, she thought. If he's asleep, then we'll have a terribly awkward morning and I won't be able to concentrate on anything except how we kissed last night. If he's gone, then I'll know that my kiss is enough to send a man packing at first light." She chuckled softly. She wasn't sure which one she'd prefer. As it turned out, he was gone, but the empty sofa wasn't what she first noticed. Instead, as she stepped into the parlor doorway and looked into the room, her jaw dropped. There, in the corner, where only a few hours ago there had been nothing, now stood a tree, an honest-to-God pine tree, taller than she was, with a pair of crossed boards nailed into the bottom of the trunk to hold it up. She stared at it for a long time, convinced that she was still asleep in bed, and only when she approached and felt the prickly needles did she fully realize that it was no dream. She leaned close to inhale, letting the smell of the fresh pine fill her lungs. The branches were still covered with droplets of moisture, shining in the morning sunlight that streamed through the window, and Alex had cut out some paper decorations, including a star to top things off. It was simple and sparsely decorated, but it was perhaps the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She looked to the sofa where Alex had left the blankets neatly folded. The tree had been a lovely surprise, but she couldn't help thinking how much nicer it would have been if he had stayed. It was rare to find somebody with whom you felt a connection, and having him leave without even getting to say goodbye made for a bitter edge on the otherwise sweet start to the day. Emily turned and went down the hall to the kitchen, hoping that Frankie would give her the gift of 10 more minutes so that she could make some tea and enjoy it in the parlor. As soon as she entered the kitchen, however, she nearly forgot what she'd come there for, as she received her second shock of the morning. She had left the table bare the night before. Not that she had anything in the house to leave out, but this morning every square inch was covered. There were breads and pies, jellies and jams, cookies and jerky and apples and pickles and everything else that one could imagine. It was more food than she'd had in the house since Virgil. She and Frankie would be eating decent meals into the new year. There was so much. She closed her eyes for 2 reasons. 1, to say a prayer of thanks, and 2, to keep the tears from pouring out. Only the first reason worked. The entire kitchen was blurry as she went to revive the fire in the oven. She wiped her tears on her sleeve and took a deep breath to calm herself as she fanned the warm embers. And here I was, convinced that there were no good people left, she thought. He gave up his whole Christmas because he felt I needed it more? She heard Frankie cooing in his cradle upstairs, and Emily quickly filled the kettle and put it over the fire before going to get him. It turned out that her son was also enthralled by the sight of a tree inside the house, and she spent several minutes sitting with him on the rug, simply watching the joy on his face as he crawled over to the tree, swatted a low branch with one little hand, and then hurried back to her to start all over again. The kettle began to whistle, and Emily left Frankie to play with the tree while she went to the kitchen. She removed the kettle from the fire and set it aside while she dropped a bit of tea into the pot, then poured in the boiling water. She was letting the tea steep and examining the table of treats when she noticed a faint, high-pitched noise. She glanced over the stove, sure that she'd absent-mindedly set the kettle on the fire again, but it wasn't the case. Now, what could that be? It was quiet for a moment, but then she heard it again. It was soft, but gradually growing stronger, as if it were getting closer. Sounds almost like bells. She went to the window and glanced out, but there was nothing to be seen besides the brilliantly white field. Nevertheless, the bells were growing louder, and she went to the front door and opened up. Just coming to a halt in front of her porch was a draft horse hitched to a sleigh. The horse's collar was covered with small silver bells that jingled with its every movement, and in the driver's seat, wearing an enormous fur hat and a grin, was Alex. It was all so strange and unexpected that she burst out laughing. In spite of her exhaustion, in spite of how her nerves had been frayed over the last few days, she let out with a laugh that came from deep in her belly and left her teary-eyed. "What is all this?" she asked when she finally recovered. "This is your ride to church," Alex said. "I'm taking you. Like I said, doctor's orders." "Where did you get the sleigh?" "I borrowed it from Monty Cantwell. You'd be amazed at what people will do for you when you're the only doctor in 100 miles. He climbed down and walked right up to her, taking her into his arms for a quick embrace. "How's Frankie?" "Perfect," she said. "He's looking at the tree." "I want to go see him. and then we should get ready to go. He took her by the hand and led her back inside. Alex, I told you, we're not going. I only know a few people in town. And we're going to change that. There's a whole town full of people that I'm pretty sure would love to get to know you better. Alex strode directly into the parlor and squatted in front of Frankie. It's good to see you up and about, my boy. He slipped his hand onto Frankie's forehead. He had no fever overnight? None. Alex chuckled as he stood up again. He's one for the textbooks, he said, then turned to Emily. So it sounds like you really have no reason not to go then. Frankie's fine and I'm here to take you. Are you going to go get ready? I don't know, Alex. I appreciate what you're trying to do. You know, it's going to save us both a lot of time and trouble if you just say yes right now. He reached for her hand and clasped it between his own. I'm not leaving, and I'm not giving up on you. Emily felt her breath being stolen away. It was as if he knew precisely what she needed to hear from him. He said he's not leaving. It would be so wonderful if only that were true. I know you didn't feel that you could trust people before, he said, and perhaps you still don't. But I'm asking you as a friend, maybe something more than a friend, to trust me today. We're going to find that faith you lost. Do you think that's even possible? I know it is. You said you needed to know that people were good, that you needed a reason for Christmas. I think I've seen a little bit of that now, she said, nodding toward the tree. What with the tree and the food. Her voice cracked slightly, and it took her a moment to regain her speech. It means a lot to me that you did that. More than you know. I'm happy to hear that, he said. But that's not what I meant. This has nothing to do with me and everything to do with you. Me? Of course. Look, if anybody has a reason to be bitter, it's you. Most people would take that cruelty that the world had given them and they'd carry that around inside forever. But when I look at you, I see only a woman who shows compassion and friendship, a person who took the worst that could happen and returns love upon the world every day. She felt her face turn pink. She hadn't heard anyone talk about her like that in, well, forever. You want proof that people are good in this world? He asked. Well, here you have it. Just look in the mirror. You're the proof. Oh, Alex, she thought. I got my proof today. That part I won't argue. All right, she said. We'll go. You won't be sorry. But I wanted to tell you something before we leave, she said. Before she could continue, Emily felt the oddest sensation just then, as if she weren't just living one moment on just one day. It felt like all of it, Alex, the tree, Frankie playing on the rug, all of them together celebrating, was part of something larger than a single minute from her life today. It felt like she'd been given a glimpse of how things were going to be for her from now on. She could see no reason to think that it was so, but she decided to take it on faith. What was it you wanted to say? She took his hand and squeezed. I wanted to say thank you, Alex, and Merry Christmas. And from Westward Hearts, I'd like to thank you for listening with us. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next stories. We have a lot that we'd like to share with you. Take care, and happy holidays.